Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, April 4th, 2023. Former President Donald Trump pleads not guilty to 34 felony charges of falsifying business records related to a payoff of a woman before the 2016 presidential campaign who claims he had an affair with him. It's the first time in U.S. history a former president has been indicted and arraigned on charges. Coming up, we'll hear from the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and the team of defense lawyers for Donald Trump. They both spoke with reporters. And we'll talk about the charges and what happens next in the legal process with a Washington Post reporter. Today's proceedings also bringing out a few thousand energetic protesters, both in support of Donald Trump and in support of his prosecution in this case. And among them, in the noisy crowd, some members of Congress. We'll hear from Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia and Democrat Jamal Bowman of New York. Also today, President Joe Biden talking about the opportunities of artificial intelligence and also the risks as he met at the White House with his Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. World Bank President David Malpass on the chances of a global economic recession. And Finland officially joins the NATO military alliance, member state number 31. From the Associated Press, Donald Trump conspired to undermine the 2016 election through a series of hush money payments designed to stifle claims that could be harmful to his candidacy, prosecutors said Tuesday in unsealing a historic 34-count felony indictment against the former president. Donald Trump, stone-faced and silent as he entered and exited the Manhattan courtroom, said not guilty in a firm voice while facing a judge who warned him to refrain from rhetoric that could inflame or cause civil unrest. The arraignment, though procedural in nature, amounts to a remarkable reckoning for Donald Trump after years of investigations into his personal business and political dealings. The case is unfolding against the backdrop not only of his third campaign for the White House, but also against other investigations in Washington and Atlanta that might yet produce even more charges. That from Associated Press. After the arraignment, the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg held a news conference.
Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the three people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described and that which was charged by the grand jury is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world.
The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg at a news conference in New York City after today's arraignment of former President Donald Trump. Donald Trump's team of lawyers also speaking to reporters. It was more of an informal gaggle with them outside the courtroom. Joe Tacopino, Todd Blanche, and Susan Necklace. Joe Tacopino begins.
Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country, because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
What are we going to hear from him tonight when he speaks?
When?
Tonight.
Yeah, 8 o'clock.
What are we going to hear?
What? I don't know. You'll hear it.
You should tune in and you'll
You
hear
think we know?
The prosecution wanted a trial date for January. Did you think that was realistic?
No.
Can you guys talk about, there's a lot of speculation about the unity among the defense attorneys.
Look at this. Look at us.
Is that why you chose to do this? To come out
together?
Yeah.
We chose to come out together so we could speak with one voice, but there is no disunity here. That's gossip and it's nonsense.
And
we've been working together and we will be working together.
And this, to me, quite frankly, is the best team I've ever worked with, the lawyers. I'm honored to be working with these guys. It's a family, it's a team, and we have one mission, and we'll achieve that mission.
What's your next move?
I mean, I'm going to go home and have some food.
What about the change of venue stuff? When do we...
I mean, we're going to start fighting the case. I didn't mean to be flippant with you.
When do you start filing motions? I'm assuming one of the first things you're going to do
The judge set a motion schedule.
to dismiss. I assume that'll be something.
The judge set a motion schedule that requires motion files in 4 months. So that's when we'll be filing motions.
This whole notion about how this is sort of like a novel, or do you...
It's not a notion. It's actually a fact. It's never been
but
tried
talk
before.
about that. But like,
there's nothing else to say except the district attorney. This office has existed for decades and decades, and you can find one if you'd like. You'll never see a charge like this ever.
You understand
this case?
You understand this? As simple as this: a state prosecutor is prosecuting a federal election law violation that doesn't exist according to federal election law officials. It's as simple as that. You could sum it all up like that.
Will there be anything else in your motion to dismiss?
That we haven't even come
what about
close
the
to
change of venue?
the
There's all this talk. Can someone address that now?
The defendant could potentially post discovery on social media. Will you commit that your client won't do that?
That won't happen. And he more than us committing, he's committed. We're not here to play games. We're to win a case.
Change of venue. A lot.
About posting on social media. Have you given him
We're not having any discussion about what we told her.
What about the change of venue? Just answer this question about the change of venue. There's a lot of...
It's premature.
Right. So why is he talking about that? Why is he trying to move this to a place like Staten Island?
Once again, we're three lawyers here to litigate and fight this case. We're not PR consultants. We're not social media consultants. Donald Trump has made one hell of a brand and became president of the United States with his social media and posts and everything else, his messages. We are here to talk about the case and litigate cases. We can't address what he posts or what he wants to post or did post.
But as his attorneys, have you told him to stop posting this rhetoric, these
what I said
messages about the
before
judge?
was we can't, literally, we can't tell you what we've discussed with our client.
I understand,
so
but are
that's
you
the answer.
concerned that he's continuing to go after the judge, talking about the judge's wife, talking about the family? I mean,
I don't think the judge was concerned about it.
Yeah, but any other defendant, wouldn't you be like...
Any other defendant wouldn't be here today.
He's not going after the judge. He is not going after the judge. He commented that he thought that there were some issues that may cause a conflict. That's not going after the judge. He is not threatening the judge. He is not going after the judge.
He's going after the DA.
He has said that the DA, he is angry because the DA has brought a case that is unjustified. And so I'm not going to comment on it. You may disagree with the way he spoke, but he is angry.
The process? Was he fingerprinted? Was there a mugshot?
I'm not going to talk about it.
Was there a mugshot?
In fact, I think thank you for your attention, but we're going to move on.
Thank you.
What is his message?
Attorneys for Donald Trump, Joe Tacopino, Todd Blanche, and Susan Necklace, with reporters outside the courtroom in New York City. With more on today's arraignment of former President Donald Trump, joining us on the phone is Matt Brown, democracy correspondent with The Washington Post. Thanks so much for being with us. The indictment unsealed today. What are these charges against former President Trump, and any surprises in the document?
Yes, absolutely. So we know from the 34 counts that were charged against Trump today that they all were for the falsification of business records in the first degree. What's a surprise is the business records in question. I think that everyone was broadly aware of the fact that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg was interested in pursuing Trump on potential fraud charges related to payments that Trump made in 2016 to adult film actress Stormy Daniels. What we've discovered in this case, though, is that he is also casting a much wider net relating to issues with the Trump Organization, as well as other outstanding legal matters that Trump has had with one other woman who was affiliated with Trump at one point or alleges to have had relations with him. So this case seems to have been a much more sweeping indictment of Trump's many years of potential wrongdoing than just what we had initially discussed about the case.
Do we know what happens next in the legal process?
Yes. So Trump has pled not guilty in all charges, which means that now we are going to see the process of the Manhattan District Attorney is going to have to make the case and present the evidence they have to show that that they can make the case against Trump to show that these are legitimate charges. That could take several months just in Manhattan court alone before we could even see a ruling there. And then this is obviously going to be appealed by Trump's lawyers all the way up to and potentially even past the 2024 presidential election.
Cameras were not allowed in the courtroom today. We saw some still photography that was released, and a handful of reporters with pen and pad. What did we learn about what happened there?
Definitely. So as you said, the judges made very clear in the days before the case that he did not want this to be a political spectacle. He said that he believed that this was a very historic case. Those are his words. And that's why he justified not allowing media inside. A couple things that we know from our colleagues who were inside of the room is that Donald Trump sat in the middle of the defense table, flanked by one side by Todd Blanche, Boris Epstein, Susan Michelle. These are, obviously very famous figures who've circled Trump for a long time. His demeanor was very clearly clear that he did not want to be here, I think is probably the best way to put it. From what we know from what also happened in the room. But he's been made very clear that he was going to fight these charges through the end. And I think that we're going to probably see that in his speech tonight at Mar-a-Lago.
And Donald Trump has been heavily criticizing the judge and the Manhattan District Attorney. Now that he's a criminal defendant, what might those statements mean going forward?
Well, I don't know that I think it's a little too early for us to interrogate the question of whether those statements might constitute interference with the judicial process. But it was clear that this is on the judge's mind. At the end of the case, he'd instructed Donald Trump to not make any statements to his supporters that could potentially incite violence against lawmakers. Which is a very important statement, given that Trump has already criticized the district attorney over bringing this case and has, attacked a whole range of institutions. Obviously, this is a pattern that he has demonstrated before and while in office and now after office. So I think that it's going to be really important to pay attention to what Trump supporters and what his close political allies are saying about the situation. And that could play both in the court in terms of, showing that Trump might be trying to influence the legal process unfairly, which is not legal, but then also potentially just the ramifications of that in the street. This is obviously a very, while it is a directly legal process of accountability at the moment, there's also deep political questions here, including potentially and unfortunately, as the mayor of New York City also pointed out, a question of political violence.
Matt Brown is democracy reporter with The Washington Post. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
TheHill.com reports that Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia, was drowned out by counter-protesters as she rallied to former President Trump's defense outside of Manhattan Courthouse and compared Donald Trump to Jesus in an interview ahead of the arraignment. That interview was with Right Side Broadcasting host Brian Glenn on the way to the rally. And she said Donald Trump is joining some of the most incredible people in history being arrested today. Nelson Mandela was arrested, served time in prison. Jesus was arrested and murdered by the Roman government. When she got to the rally, she spoke in the middle of the crowd with a bullhorn.
I'm here to protest and use my voice and take a stand. Every American should take a stand. This is what happens in communist countries, not the United States of America. We have to take a stand against the injustice, the corruption, and the communist Democrats who are taking our legal code and twisting it, manipulating it, and perverting it into something it was never meant to be. Donald J. Trump is innocent. This is election interference. The DA, Alvin Bragg, is nothing but a George Soros-funded tool. He is a tool for the Democrats to try to hijack the 2024 presidential election. This is a travesty, and I'm here as a representative and a member of Congress to take a stand using my First Amendment right to speak out against this. This should never happen in America, ever. And every single American should be concerned. They're coming after President Trump today, and they will come after you tomorrow. President Trump did nothing wrong. They have nothing to stand on. This administration has ripped our borders wide open. This administration is on the verge of World War III. This administration is sexualizing children and trying to change their gender. This administration is a failure. They have nothing to campaign on, so they've decided to arrest President Trump, who is innocent, on the word of a porn star and a felon. This is such a failure, and this will not stand. People will not stand for this. For 6 years, they have lied and said that President Trump would be a threat to democracy. But the real threat of democracy is today, when they are arresting him. I cannot believe that this is happening.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, in New York outside the courthouse, a rally before Donald Trump's arraignment. She later tweeted, "The New York public advocate, Jumaane Williams, was one of Mayor Adams's thugs blowing a whistle at me in the park today across from the courthouse while I peacefully protested and used my free speech rights to protest the weaponization of government and persecution of President Trump. The Democrat Party and Democrats in government are Antifa." Also in the crowd today outside the courthouse and speaking with reporters, Congressman Jamal Bowman, a Democrat from New York.
Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here! Congressman, what inspired that today? Jamal Bowman. What inspired that today, Congressman? I was born and raised in New York City. This is the city that I love. It's a city focused on hard work and love for all people. We will never accept hateful rhetoric in our city. Any rhetoric that is divisive, any rhetoric that uplifts white supremacy, we are pushing back against that in all its forms. Marjorie Taylor Greene needs to take her back to Washington and do something about gun violence, do something about affordable housing, do something about childhood poverty, do something about climate change, Do your freaking job, Marjorie Taylor Greene. You don't need to be in New York City talking that nonsense. Go back to your district. You're not. What are you doing here?
Congressman Jamal Bowman, Democrat from New York, in New York outside the courthouse. That audio from NBC News. Politico also has this. New York Republican Congressman George Santos quickly walked by the courthouse, not stopping to protest or answer questions. He did tell reporters, "I want to support the president because this is unprecedented and this is a bad day for democracy. This starts a precedent of what's going to stop the next prosecutor in 2 years to do the same thing to Joe Biden and moving on every 4 years. This cheapens the judicial system, not good for America." That quote from Congressman George Santos. The Politico article mentions George Santos, who is currently under investigation by the House Ethics Committee, did not answer multiple questions about his own legal troubles. George Santos has been tied to multiple controversies since his election, including fabricating major portions of his biography, accusations of stealing money from veterans, alleged involvement in a credit card scam, and falsely claiming to be Jewish. The story from Fox News this morning: a woman wearing a Make America Great Again hat fell to the ground after trampling an anti-Trump flag strewn across the ground near the New York City courthouse where former President Trump is set to be arraigned. According to photos of the chaotic scene, the Trump supporter ran across and grabbed a large banner with the words "Trump lies all the time" written on it. She then fell onto the ground and laid on the flag before she was confronted by protesters wearing shirts calling for the arrest of the former president. Back in Washington at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked how President Joe Biden has been following or not following what's been going on in New York City.
President Biden is a lawyer. Is he
and
concerned?
the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief, but go ahead.
He is, but as a lawyer, is he concerned at all that a local DA indicting a former president could down the line open up the possibility, set the precedent, that local DAs that don't like former President Biden could indict him?
I'm not going to comment from here.
Why don't you have more to say about the Trump indictment?
It is an ongoing case, and I've been very clear about that. We've been prudent about that, not commenting on ongoing cases, and we're going to stick to that.
But for
Peter?
better or worse, all that anybody in the country is talking about at this exact moment while we are in here is Trump. And they look here to find out what the White House thinks about it. And
Well, I think the American people should feel reassured that when there is an ongoing case like this one, that we're just not commenting.
And so, does the lack of comment mean that you do not think anything happening in New York today is one of the top issues facing the country at the moment?
That's your assessment. That's not my assessment. I'm just laying out the facts that we are just not going to comment on an ongoing case from here. And we've been very consistent. We've been very prudent, and we're going to stick there.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre getting questions from Fox News White House correspondent Peter Doocy at today's briefing. Former President Donald Trump is running for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination, and today John Kasich, who ran against Donald Trump for the Republican nomination back in 2016. John Kasich, also a former Republican congressman from Ohio and former governor of Ohio, now an MSNBC analyst on that cable station talking about the 2024 race, today's arraignment, and the other investigations against Donald Trump still underway.
There are a lot of Republicans that say, is this really a legitimate and fair charge? And frankly, you know, no one is above the law, but what would be interesting to find out is how's everybody else been treated, because a public figure shouldn't have more scrutiny than anybody else. So a lot of Republicans are like, you know, this is really political. And I talked to some folks this morning in the gym. They're like, we wish he'd just go away. But look, when you look at Georgia, and there isn't anybody, no Republican or Democrat that's knowledgeable, that doesn't look at the Georgia grand jury or the documents case, which seems to be percolating even more. I mean, I think that just works. I think that's kind of the end of it. I mean, I suppose Republicans could put up with this thing, and we see how the trial goes, right? You have to see what happens at the press conference today with the prosecutor, and you know, how does Trump handle himself today? I noticed, Andrea, that some of the Republican support has slipped from him He's still up there at 80%, but it's not like the 90-some. And the country itself says that the indictment should go forward. But I suspect that if, in fact, Atlanta, Georgia comes back on the vote pressure scheme or either the document case, I think that's going to be too much water for him to take. But, he's like the master of escape, and we just have to wait and see. But here's what I do know. There's no way the guy's going to be president, because there's no way these independent voters and Republicans who are sort of normal people, who are the traditional Republicans, let me say that. I don't want to call anybody abnormal, but traditional Republicans, there is no way in a million years that those people are going to vote for him. So my view is he'll never be president, and it's a pathetic day. The other thing I want to say, Andrea, is I watched yesterday, these cars coming out of Mar-a-Lago. We got to put the cameras on, 9 cars coming out. Then we show the airport. Then we show the plane. It's like reminds me, I had a flashback. It was like the old empty podium. We've got to it's ridiculous. It's not that interesting. There's more interesting things happening, but somehow I guess we're fixated on it.
John Kasich, former Republican presidential candidate, former governor and congressman from Ohio, on MSNBC Today with Andrea Mitchell. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals today has denied an emergency motion from former President Trump's legal team to try to stop the testimony of former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and other top Trump White House staffers in the Justice Department's investigation of the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol, the appeals court rejecting claims of executive privilege. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts or at cspan.org/podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. President Biden meeting today with the White House Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, discussing, as the White House put it in a preview press release, the risks and opportunities of artificial intelligence. Associated Press writing that AI burst to the forefront in the national conversation after release of the popular ChatGPT AI chatbot, which helped spark a race among tech giants to unveil similar tools while raising ethical and societal concerns from the powerful technology. The President spoke for a couple of minutes before the meeting.
Thank you for being here. And I want to thank our panel here today, our guests, including Arthi and Dr. Arnold, Dr. Zuber. And this has always been, over the years, one of my favorite meetings. We used to have these, the PCAST would meet downstairs in the past. Does that go off? Downstairs in the past. And when I was in the Barack's administration. And I'd always keep them later. They always wonder why I want to stay around and learn more. But anyway, thank you. You know, America is the only nation in the world that can be defined, in my view, by a single word, possibilities. I was in the Tibetan Plateau with Xi Jinping, and he asked if I could define America. I said, yeah, one word, possibilities. We believe about anything is possible if we put our mind to it. And that's what you all represent, the enormous possibilities that exist. And today we're going to discuss the opportunities and the risks of artificial intelligence. AI can help deal with some very difficult challenges like disease and climate change, but also have to address the potential risks to our society, to our economy, to our national security. Last October, we proposed a Bill of Rights to ensure the important protections are built into the AI systems from the start, not have to go back to do it. And I look forward to today's discussion about ensuring responsible innovation and appropriate guardrails to protect America's rights and safety, and protecting their privacy, and to address the bias and disinformation that is possible as well. And so tech companies have a responsibility, in my view, to make sure their products are safe before making them public. Social media has already shown us the harm that powerful technologies can do without the right safeguards in place. Absent safeguards, we see the impact on the mental health and self-images and feelings and hopelessness, especially among young people. And as I said in the State of the Union address to Congress, Congress needs to pass, bipartisan privacy legislation to, one, impose strict limits on personal data that tech companies collect on all of us. Two, ban advertising, targeted advertising to children. And three, require companies to put health and safety first in the products that they build. So with that, I'm going to, as my mother would say, hush up, and let's get this meeting started. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. We'll take a minute and let the press clear.
It remains to be seen. It could be.
Is the indictment of your predecessor politically divisive? Thank you. Let's go, guys. Thank you.
President Biden at the White House at a meeting of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, known as PCAST, which whitehouse.gov describes as an independent federal advisory committee comprised of distinguished individuals from industry, academia, and nonprofit organizations with a range of perspectives and expertise. It is chaired by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy Chair. Last year, the Biden administration released a blueprint Bill of Rights to help ensure users' rights are protected as technology companies design and develop AI systems. This from Fox Business: turmoil that has engulfed the financial sector in the wake of recent bank collapses is not over yet and will ripple throughout the economy for many years, according to J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon. In his 43-page annual letter to shareholders, the chief executive of America's largest bank offered his assessment of the banking crisis that has gripped global markets for weeks and urged federal regulators to refrain from overreacting with more rules and regulations. The World Bank President David Malpass also talking about the instability of banks and the effect on the global economy today in a conversation with Bloomberg News reporter Lisa Abramowitz.
Do you think, and this is something that is being hotly debated in the markets, that the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and a couple other smaller banks in the U.S., regional banks, does have a systemic effect that will essentially restrict lending not just to small businesses in the U.S., but exacerbate what you're seeing in the developing world as well?
And I want to parse the word systemic effect. So is it a systemic risk for the system? Maybe the regulators have been able to address that. Are there follow-on effects? I think clearly yes. It makes it so each person with deposits in banks examines that, checks the safety, and there's a migration toward the bigger banks. I would argue the U.S. But it's also true in all of the advanced economies that there's this huge value in small and regional banks and even community banks because of the relationship with their customers. Small businesses that need an inventory loan, an accounts receivable loan, auto loans, truck loans. That's, the lifeblood of small commerce is the ability to finance a truck through a finance company or a lease. So that has to be maintained, and there needs to be explicit policies to do that.
All things being equal, do you think that the risk of a global recession has gone up over the past 3 weeks?
Yes, but there's always some risk of a recession, and so on the change on the margin is what we're seeing. So you've seen short-term two-year Treasury yields came down quite a bit as people worried about the fragility of the system. So on the one hand, that's good because we want lower interest rates, but of course, don't we want it in the context of fast growth? That's explicit on you've got to replace stagflation with lots more production at a lower interest rate. That gives you the growth of the future.
So you're coming up to the end of your tenure at the World Bank as the president. What advice would you give the next president of the World Bank?
you be very engaged in the countries that are the borrowers or the recipients of grants from the bank. One could use one's time 100% in conferences in the advanced economies, but that's not really where the action is. The action is how do you convince countries to make the changes that they need. One that's related to climate change is adaptation. We are doing a series of reports that are specific country by country what they can do to protect for the future. One thing is move people, don't have the population growth on the floodplain. So it sounds obvious, very difficult for countries to do that because the people want to move to where there is land available, often on a floodplain. So how do you set up policies to really guide in a better direction? Those are all, real challenges for the daily operation of the bank.
The World Bank President David Malpass, a conversation with Lisa Abramowitz, co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Today at a program in Washington hosted by the Atlantic Council. You can find the full video at our website at cspan.org. David Malpass is resigning at the end of June, 1 year earlier than his term would expire, and he said during today's program that he would like to return to the private sector after spending 15 years in government positions, including Undersecretary of the Treasury during the Donald Trump administration. CBS News reporting today the chair of Credit Suisse apologized Tuesday to shareholders for failures of the once venerable bank and acknowledged the shock and anger as the troubled Swiss lender is set to be swallowed up by rival UBS in a government-arranged takeover. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 198, NASDAQ down 63, S&P down 23. U.S. Labor Department says job openings in the United States dropped in February to the lowest level in nearly 2 years, down 632,000 to 9.9 million. The national anthem of Finland played today on the plaza outside NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, as the flag of Finland was raised and Finland officially became the 31st NATO member state. Reuters reports that Finland's accession roughly doubles the length of the border that NATO shares with Russia and bolsters its eastern flank as the war in Ukraine grinds on with no resolution in sight. The Finnish president, Sauli Niinisto, saying today that Finland's most significant contribution to NATO's common defense would be to defend its own territory.
Finland has today become the 31st member of NATO. The era of military non-alignment in our history has come to an end. A new era begins. Each country maximizes its own security. So does Finland. NATO membership strengthens our international position and room for maneuver. As a partner, we have already long actively participated in NATO activities. As an ally, Finland will contribute to NATO's collective deterrence and defense. Membership of the alliance provides security for Finland. Finland, on the other hand, provides security for the alliance. Finland, committed to the security of all NATO member states, will be a reliable ally that strengthens regional stability. Finland's membership is not targeted against anyone, nor does it change the foundations or objectives of Finland's foreign and security policy. Finland is a stable and predictable Nordic country that seeks peaceful resolution of disputes. The principles and values that are important to Finland will continue to guide our foreign policy also in the future. NATO membership does not change everything, but being an ally requires Finland to adopt new ways of thinking and some changes in legislation as well. A lot has already been done. For years, we have developed our NATO compatibility. There's still considerable work ahead to integrate Finland's defense as part of NATO's common defense. The Finnish defense forces are facing new demands and challenges to which we must respond.
The president of Finland, Sauli Niinisto, at NATO headquarters in Brussels, Belgium, as Finland becomes the latest member of the military alliance. Both Finland and Sweden applied for membership last year after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All member states must ratify any new member, and Sweden's application has not been ratified by two, Turkey and Hungary. More from the Reuters article. The Kremlin said Russia would be forced to take countermeasures to Finland's accession. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said the move raised the prospect of the conflict in Ukraine escalating further. Russia had said on Monday it would strengthen its military capacity in its western and northwestern regions in response to Finland joining NATO. The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also at NATO headquarters attending a meeting of alliance foreign ministers, and he in fact formally received the document from the Finnish foreign minister completing Finland's admittance to NATO. And during a brief meeting with NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, Secretary Blinken talked about Finland and the challenges confronting NATO, including the war in Ukraine.
This is truly a historic day because very shortly, as the Secretary General said, we will be welcoming Finland into the alliance, to its seat at the table. I'm tempted to say this is maybe the one thing we can thank Mr. Putin for, because he, once again here, has precipitated something he claims to want to prevent by Russia's aggression, causing many countries to believe that they have to do more to look out for their own defense and to make sure that they could deter possible Russian aggression going forward. But I think we're going to be thrilled to have Finland as the 31st member of this alliance. So this is an important day, on an important day already in NATO's history. And then, as the Secretary General said, we have a lot of work to do today to prepare for the Vilnius summit with the leaders from our countries coming together. That, too, will be a hugely important moment, both in continuing to reaffirm in both political and practical ways our support for Ukraine, to continue the work that we've been doing over previous summits to strengthen the defense and deterrence capacity of the alliance itself, and, as the Secretary General said, to continue to build out new partnerships between NATO and countries in other parts of the world, notably in the Asia-Pacific, precisely for the reasons that the Secretary General said. The challenges that we're facing are global in nature, and what we've seen over the last couple of years is greater convergence than I've seen in my own experience doing this for 30 years between the United States and Europe, between the United States and Asian partners, and amongst all of us in how to effectively meet the challenges of our time. So the work could not be more timely, could not be more important, and as always, it's great to be here at NATO. Thank you. Thank you.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at NATO in Belgium, standing beside the NATO Secretary General. President Joe Biden with a written statement that reads in part, "Today I am proud to welcome Finland as NATO's 31st ally. 74 years ago today, as the United States and 11 other nations came together to form the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, President Truman said, if there is anything inevitable in the future, it is the will of the people of the world for freedom and peace. Today, that will is stronger than ever with the addition of Finland to NATO." President Biden also in his statement calling for Turkey and Hungary to ratify Sweden's admission to NATO. Connecticut's congressional delegation congratulating the UConn Huskies men's basketball team for winning the NCAA March Madness tournament last night. Joe Courtney of Connecticut tweeting, UConn men weren't even ranked at the beginning of the season, and with grit and skill, they once again shocked the world. UConn defeating the San Diego State University Aztecs. Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs of California with this tweet, an amazing season from an amazing team. So proud of Aztec men's basketball. On the women's tournament, CNN has this story. First Lady Jill Biden appeared to walk back suggestions that the White House might invite both LSU and Iowa's women's basketball teams after Tiger star Angel Reese called it a joke on Monday. This is what the First Lady Jill Biden said in Denver on Monday.
So I know we'll have the champions come to the White House. We always do. So, we'll have LSU come. But you know what? I'm going to tell Joe, I think Iowa should come too, because they played such a good game. So, right? So winners and losers, that's sportsmanship. That's good sportsmanship.
That's First Lady Jill Biden in Denver on Monday after the blowback. The press secretary to the First Lady, Vanessa Valdivia, tweeting today, the First Lady loved watching the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship game alongside young student athletes and admires how far women have advanced in sports since the passing of Title IX. Her comments in Colorado were intended to applaud the historic game and all women athletes. She looks forward to celebrating the LSU Tigers on their championship win at the White House. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. To get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.